The McLaren Formula 1 team is enduring a difficult time, having gone from race-winning form in 2012, ending the season with the fastest car on the grid, to being last of the point-scoring teams in the 2015 season. But McLaren is not the only team to have gone from the front to the back of the grid in a relatively short space of time. In fact, history is littered of teams that have gone from hero to zero, and that's what this video is all about. The teams that have seen spectacular downturns in form. First up is the disastrous season in 1966 for the BRM team, who went from second with 45 points the previous season to fourth in the constructors' table with 22 points. After a miserable time throughout most of the 1950s, BRM finally achieved success in the 1.5 litre formula of the early 1960s, thanks to a small, neat V8 and the skills of Graham Hill and, latterly, Jackie Stewart. They won the Constructors' Championship in 1962 and were runners-up from 1963 to 1965. But with the 3 litre formula of 1966 looming, the team repeated errors from earlier on in their history, opting for 16 cylinders of complexity, weight and trouble. The 1.5 litre V8 was flattened out. The 1.5 litre V8 was flattened out to make a flat 8, and another was mounted on top to make a 3 litre H16 engine. Designed by Tony Rudd, the original concept involved 6 camshafts between the 4 cylinder heads, with the 2 crankshafts being directly linked. Think that sounds bad? It got worse. It ended up having 8 camshafts and a chain to link the 2 cranks. The castings were thicker than intended too, and it weighed in at more than 250 kilograms for not much more than 400 brake horsepower. Even Jackie Stewart could do little with it, although the engine did score a Grand Prix win in the back of Jim Clark's Lotus at Watkins Glen in late 1966. The following year, Lotus switched to the new Ford Cosworth V8, 405 brake horsepower from just 167 kilograms, and way less fuel was required, leaving the H16 looking utterly ridiculous. Next up is the Lotus 63 from 1969, which caused Lotus to slump from first in the Constructors' Championship with 62 points to third with 47. Four-wheel drive was going to be where it was all at in Formula 1. Just as we once assumed we would one day all have jetpacks, it was the past's idea of what the future would look like. Four-wheel drive would surely be necessary to fully exploit the enormous horsepower that was on its way. In 1968 there was crazy talk of 500 brake horsepower soon being achievable. The Lotus 63 was born right in the middle of 1969's four-wheel drive fever. It featured an about-face Cosworth DFV driving a gearbox in the centre of a car and a differential that diverted around 25% of the torque to the front wheels. The fuel tank was at the back, where the gearbox would normally be. Mercurial team boss Colin Chapman was so convinced of the concept's future that on the eve of the British Grand Prix he sold the team's conventional and super quick 49 models. A couple of races earlier, Jochen Rindt had refused to drive the Lotus 63, and this was Chapman's resolution to the problem. But Rindt again refused at Silverstone, and after Graham Hill had proved just how much slower it was than the 49, Chapman had to borrow back the cars he'd just sold. Wings and tyre development had nullified the traction advantages of four-wheel drive, leaving just the downsides of weight and poor drivability. Next up is the March 721X from 1972, causing March to drop from 4th the previous season with 33 points to 6th with 15 points. Stung by criticism from various quarters that the 1970 March 701 was just too conservative, designer Robin Hurd, along with Jeff Ferris and aerodynamicist Frank Costin, tried a more radical approach with the T-Tray front wing 711. It made Ronnie Peterson runner-up in the World Championship. For 1972, Hurd was even more extreme, and the 721X was conceived around the concept of minimizing the polar moment of inertia, that's reducing the dumbbell effect of changing direction. Centering the car's mass was the key to this, so a transverse gearbox was placed before the rear axle line, which moved the engine forward from the rear wheels, butting it up against the cockpit. Up front was a brutal stub nose, which, in theory, would make the car fantastically responsive to direction change. Instead, the forward weight distribution created by the mechanical layout totally overwhelmed the standard issue front Goodyear tyres and produced chronic understeer. To compound that problem, when the front tyres eventually did grip, the car would respond very suddenly, inducing horribly unexpected oversteer. Peterson, rated as the world's fastest driver, felt the car was good. His teammate, a pay driver novice called Niki Lauda, insisted it was hopeless. Hurd soon realised that Lauda was right. Lotus again next with the Lotus 80 from 1979, which caused the team to slide from first with 86 points to fifth with 39. After changing the face of Formula 1 downforce with ground effects en route to the championship in 1978, Lotus planned to move the whole game on another massive step. A step too far, as it turned out. The Lotus 80 was conceived to derive all of its downforce from the underbody, with no need for wings. Skirts ran the full length of the car. The side pods, which housed the ground effect generating Venturi tubes, were extended and the wings banished. It looked gorgeous, but it didn't work. The concept required the entire underbody to be enclosed, which meant that the side pods were curved in plain view, so they simply didn't stop ahead of the rear wheels. The skirts could not cope with the curvature and kept sticking, but the real limitation was that the huge underbody downforce could not be properly harnessed due to porpoising, the violent bouncing action as the airflow got out of phase with the bumps on the track and the cars springing. When the car finally did race, it did so equipped with conventional front and rear wings. Lotus and Mario Andretti persevered with it for a few races, but since it was unable to run its intended wingless form, and much of its potential downforce was rendered useless, it was simply a heavier, less agile Lotus 79, and it was duly abandoned. Fast forward to 1986 with the Brabham BT55, which caused Brabham to slide from 5th with 26 points to 9th with just 2. Brabham were one of F1's sharpest squads in the early 1980s, with star driver Nelson Piquet taking the 1981 and 1983 drivers' titles and the team winning races into 1985. But by 1986, with engine supplier BMW falling behind in the technology stakes and Brabham team boss Bernie Ecclestone starting to lose interest, the roller skate BT55 was a case of designer Gordon Murray gambling the house on red. It was positioned radically lower than any other car, with even its predecessor towering over it, and its seat was reclined at an angle of more than 30 degrees. The low drag dimensions were made possible by canting over the four-cylinder engine at 72 degrees, meaning the crankshaft lay to one side of the central axis, and a trick transverse gearbox had to be devised. The traction problems the car suffered could probably have been cured, but the biggest limitation was the engine's breathing problems. Oil could not circulate properly, costing both power and reliability, and the old BT54 was exhumed before the season got too old. Brabham never really recovered, as the car failed to ignite Bernie Ecclestone's interest in the team. But Murray was later vindicated when he used almost the same dimensions on the McLaren MP44 in 1988, which won all but one race. Next up is the Ferrari F92A from 1992, where the team fell from 3rd the previous season with 55.5 points to 4th with 21. Frenchman Jean-Claude Migeot is a brilliant aerodynamicist who came up with the modern high nose concept on the Tyrrell 019 at pretty much the same time that Adrian Newey was doing the very same thing over at Leighton House. Despite the fact that the 019 collected just 9 points over the course of 1990, Migeot subsequently landed a job at Ferrari as their chief of aerodynamics. For the 1992 season, Migeot devised the twin-floor Ferrari F92A, a machine featuring tall, narrow side pods that were raised up from the floor to form a channel running between the floor and the underside of the pods. The airflow would accelerate back from the front wing along this channel and then over the top of the full-width diffuser. The faster the airflow was sucked over the front wing, the more downforce would be created at the front, and the faster the airflow sped over the diffuser, the greater the difference in pressure between the underfloor and the upper body, thereby increasing underbody downforce as well. This theory was perfectly sound when considered in aerodynamic isolation, but the increase in the centre of gravity of the height from raising the side pods and the radiators within them in a car that was already far too heavy turned out to be disastrous. To untangle such a complex problem, the team really needed to have a very technically astute lead driver on board, but Ferrari had Jean Alesi driving alongside Ivan Capelli, so the Scuderia's slump from championship challenging form in 1990 continued. And lastly, it's the McLaren MP418 from 2003. The team were 3rd with 65 points the previous season and retained 3rd with a previous car. This car was never raced. McLaren's 2003 machine was all set to take construction to new levels with its no-compromise approach to weight saving and aero perfection. The brainchild of Adrian Newey, its construction was so extreme that to make key setup changes, the car had to be taken apart and have new carbon fibre sections bonded in. Unfortunately, it also had a tendency to shake itself to pieces, as proved by test driver Alex Wurtz's massive accident at the Paul Ricard circuit in France. In addition, the engine cooling proved marginal due to the super narrow side pods. Progress on the MP4-18 was delayed after it failed several crash tests, so McLaren started the season with a D-spec update of the old MP4-17, with the 18 set to appear during the European part of the season. That debut never materialised, as the 18 continued to destroy itself in testing. A Monza debut was then mooted because of the summer testing ban. This date also came and went, at which point Kimi Raikkonen was fighting a convincing campaign in the 17D. He entered the final round showdown, still in the old car, and the MP4-18 and its update, the 18B, never raced. In fact, so far ahead of its time was the MP4-18 that it didn't race until 2005, by which time it had been properly developed as the MP4-20. In that incarnation, it was clearly Formula One's fastest car, kept from the title only as a result of an unreliable engine and the combined talents of Fernando Alonso and Renault. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it, be sure to give it a like and subscribe for more if you don't want to miss any future videos from this channel. On the screen are 2 more videos that I think you might enjoy. Also, I'd like you to put in the comments your favourite catastrophic downturn in form from a motorsport team. Once again, thank you very much for watching.